You have strolled through these corridors of power, and many of these politicians have feared your every word.
I don't know about that.
I don't know about that either. But, you know, why do you think Sadiq Khan has got this knighthood? Is it, as some people have cynically said as well, that bearing in mind what we saw in the election where many Labour voters, traditional Labour voters, would have perhaps gone for those particular candidates that were standing on a pro-Palestine ticket. Some people have cynically suggested on X today that actually this is Keir Starmer perhaps thinking about the more diverse vote by going for a knighthood for Sadiq Khan rather than actually thinking about his achievements, or is that perhaps overthinking it?
Well, I think also it's worth bearing in mind that Sadiq Khan, by this stage of his career, had ambitions to be in Keir Starmer's cabinet. Now, those ambitions haven't materialised. There was a school of thought that actually he would be serving in a position like Justice Secretary in Keir Starmer's cabinet, and that hasn't happened. In actual fact, there is an irony to the fact that Heidi Alexander, who was Sadiq Khan's deputy mayor for transport, is the first member of his top team to make it into the cabinet as transport secretary for Keir Starmer. So from my reading of it, it is something of a consolation prize for Sadiq Khan. And I think the way things are heading in Westminster right now, there's no guarantee that Sadiq Khan is actually going to get the opportunity to move from City Hall into Westminster, because there's no guarantee that Keir Starmer is going to successfully fight the next election. So for Sadiq Khan to receive a knighthood at this stage, I think would mark the point at which he transitions, and I might be wrong on this, and I might be proven wrong on this, but he marks the transitioning point from his political career, his high watermark in British politics, into the next stage of his career. And I'd imagine that would have something to do with the environment, city management, that sort of thing. And I think that this knighthood is a recognition. And I take your point, by the way. It's worth mentioning, of course, that knife crime has soared 50% since Sadiq Khan became mayor. The mayoral tax precept is up 70% since Sadiq Khan became mayor in 2016. But given the demographics of London, he, alongside Andy Burnham, who is the Greater Mayor of Manchester, are Labour's most senior, successful elected politician since Tony Blair. They've managed to win 3 elections on the bounce. And that's why I think Keir Starmer has, that's the reason for Keir Starmer, at least publicly, to say, well, it's now time to recognise that achievement. But I take the fact that many of your listeners will be scratching their heads going, hang on a moment, I've now got to pay, I've had to upgrade my car because it wasn't ULEZ compliant, and that's cost me an absolute fortune. And they're people who won't be on a huge amount of money, who suddenly had to trade in an old diesel car that they perhaps didn't want to spend that money on.
Which, by the way, they were encouraged by the last Labour government, in which Sadiq Khan was a transport minister, to buy.
Yes. So they're now having, I imagine many, particularly in the boroughs around London, will be thinking, hang on a moment, I've had to spend this money. I think there'll be many people who've lost loved ones to violent crime and knife crime on the City of London will say, hang on a moment, as the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan's the Police and Crime Commissioner for London, and we expected the streets of London under his tenure to be much safer than they've proven to be so far.
Are we missing, perhaps, here? And again, I bow to your experience on this, Theo, having worked as a political editor before. But are we actually missing here, giving credit where it's due? That okay, when it comes to being a mayor, I think that Sadiq Khan, his achievements, when you look at them on paper, are absolutely diabolical. But when it comes to being a politician, he's actually brilliant, because he does seem to have this brilliant ability to solve the easy problems that get him good press that don't perhaps need solving, rather than the more difficult problems. I was talking to Ella Whelan about, there is a great deal, I think, to be said for how dreadful it is from a racism perspective, actually, that so many young black men are are killing themselves when it comes to knife crime. Far easier, though, for him to talk about the transatlantic slave trade and renaming streets and statues than solve that problem. Crime in general is absolutely up massively. The amount we pay in council tax, as you rightly point out, up massively. Far easier to say, well, look, I'm putting a cycle lane over here, or I'm bringing in a charge for clean air over here, because these will get huge amounts of publicity. I can talk about these as achievements whilst ignoring these problems which are far harder to solve over here. And that's actually, we may loathe his achievements, but that's actually very good politics, isn't it?
Yeah, I remember there's only one time, and this is, I think, perhaps, a testament to the fact that Sadiq Khan is a street fighter or a politician. There's only one time I ever actually managed to nail him in an interview. Every other time he got his message across, and it felt like he was, he'd managed to escape the question or come on off best than me. And the only time I managed to get it was in a particular wave of knife crime back in 2017, and he hadn't met the victims of anybody who had lost their lives, or the families of the victims of anybody who had lost their lives in a particularly nasty spate of killings across London. And it was the only, and I asked him about it, and I did an interview which lasted about 7 or 8 minutes. And it was the only occasion where I actually had him on the back foot. He's a street fighter of a politician, and he's been successful because he's incredibly pragmatic. And to your point, will pick the issues where he can guarantee success, and of course, stay away or steer clear from issues where actually you could reasonably, and many of your listeners could reasonably say you're accountable for that, but which are actually far more difficult and thornier, and he hasn't necessarily delivered on, and does not want to be held accountable for at any particular time. But he is an incredibly astute politician. And I think just one other point I would make is, and I know the Conservatives are leading the charge on this, right? Saying, well, Sadiq Khan is, this is reward for failure. But Sadiq Khan has won 3 mayoral elections, and in each case, he has defeated Conservative candidates. The last time around, the Tories even changed the rules to make it more difficult for him by making it first past the post, knowing there's a broader coalition of parties on the left of politics in London than there is on the right of politics in London. And Sadiq Khan still won. And the problem is that the Tories haven't put up a really good candidate in London since Boris Johnson, and they haven't run a really good campaign in London since Boris Johnson. And that is in large part why Sadiq Khan has been successful and continues to be successful. And I think the Tories would either be wise to say, let somebody else lead the charge against Sadiq Khan getting a knighthood from Keir Starmer, but it is down to their failure to put up a really top-notch candidate with a top-notch campaign that Sadiq Khan is still doing as well as he is doing.
Okay, one other point with him, and then we'll move on, is that I also think he's very astute at picking soft media. I mean, I'm surprised you ever got an interview with him again, actually, after nailing him in 2017. I'm not sure you ever did. Did you? Did he speak to you again?
I did get some interviews again, but there was a little it got a little chilly for a while.
Okay, because I've never known as well. I mean, London is traditionally quite a left-wing city, but he does either choose the media outlets, and this goes to perhaps a failure of those outlets, that seem to give him quite an easy ride. So, for instance, Evening Standard, I read a piece a few weeks ago by Ross Liddell, who is very, very pro, writer for the Evening Standard, very, very pro Sadiq Khan. And he listed all his failures, but he's won 3 elections and he's always dressed very well and comes across quite well. And that was the reason why he thought he deserved the knighthood. He gets a very easy ride on BBC London, for instance. I mean, Sadiq Khan is actually able to tweet the video packages. When he does an interview with BBC London, Sadiq Khan will actually tweet out saying, I did this interview with BBC London earlier, and put it out. And politicians shouldn't be able to do that because they've come across so well in an interview. So to what extent is his success actually a failure of media in London, either trying to cater for what they see as a left-wing audience, or just being pro Sadiq Khan and not wanting to rock the boat?
Well, interestingly, just on the Evening Standard, by the way, the Evening Standard decided to back the Conservatives in the last mayoral election, and they backed him and they backed the Conservatives in the previous mayoral election. And Sadiq Khan, to return the favour, put them out of business by introducing the internet on the underground.
You mean they chose to back Labour? You mean?
Yeah. I know. Ross Little. To be fair to Ross Little, I've met him a couple of times. He's a really great journalist, a really good guy. Let's put Ross Little to one side. But what I would say is that just on the Evening Standard broadly, that under their leadership, the paper, the editorial leadership of the paper, they decided to back the Tories. And in return, Sadiq Khan introduced Wi-Fi on the underground. And as a result, Cristo, you can't, if you try to go on the underground,
yeah,
you can read all of your stories on your phone, and you don't need to have the
I thought
internet.
they backed.
I mean, it was
I thought they backed Sadiq Khan though at the last election. Though they said that they were backing Sadiq Khan in the last mayoral election.
In the last mayoral election, I don't think they did. In my recollection, is that they certainly backed Sean Bailey over Sadiq Khan.
Yeah, maybe they did with Sean Bailey, but I'm pretty sure in the last one they backed Sadiq Khan. But I'm just looking it up for you. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong.
I apologies if you think if I've got that correct.
1st of May 2024. Why Sadiq Khan is our pick for Mayor of London.
Okay,
Evening Standard comment.
But the decision after the Evening Standard backed Bailey. Apologies on that, and apologies to your listener. But the decision after they backed Sean Bailey was that we've now seen widespread internet usage on the underground, and for the Evening Standard and for a physical newspaper, it's very difficult. There's no point in having it, and that was a fairly ruthless move. Sorry, you were making another point, Cristo.
Yeah, about why does he also get quite an easy ride from BBC London quite a lot? And again, I'm not saying this as some huge BBC hater. I like the BBC, and I think BBC London is really important as a local channel for London. But it's very, very rare he gets anything when he's unveiling a new Piccadilly line train or unveiling anything, that he gets anything other than softball questions from them.
Yeah, and look, his team is ruthless. He's ruthless, and he won't take any chances, and that's his prerogative. And I would accept your point that I trained and I worked in a world where you would expect journalists, you would expect politicians to face media from the opposite side, but Sadiq Khan doesn't play like many other politicians on both sides of the political divide, is not prepared to play that game. And if he doesn't want to do you as a journalist, if he doesn't want to be interviewed by you as a journalist, he will cut you out.
Well, he'll never come on here.
And he'll never come on your outlet. And he is prepared to forego the audience that you provide, whether it's Talk or any other station. He is prepared to forgo the chance to win over your audience by basically saying, I'm not going to do you, and I'm not going to face your questions, and I'm not going to face scrutiny from you. And still, off the back of that, he has managed to win 3 elections. Now, I'm slightly, I think that the right-wing journalists should have the chance to question left-wing politicians, and left-wing journalists should have the chance to question right-wing politicians. And when that happens, I think that's a good thing. That's good for democracy. It's good for plurality, and I would respect right-wing politicians who accept questions from left-wing journalists, and likewise left-wing politicians who accept questions from right-wing journalists. But we have to accept that for Sadiq Khan and indeed many other politicians, they are not willing to do that, and that as a result, they still, we don't have that scrutiny.
Maybe there we're getting actually to the crux of why Sadiq Khan has a fairly limited scope as to where he can go from here, because he ain't going to get away with that in cabinet. He ain't going to get away with that if he ever had these aspirations, which we heard about years ago, to be Prime Minister. Well, you need to talk to the Sun newspaper. You need to talk to some of those outlets, and perhaps he is more concerned with not tainting his legacy in London and keeping it that, rather than perhaps moving on and actually facing the scrutiny that would expose some of his failures.